Hello and welcome to the December 16th edition of the Cluster API provider AWS Office Hours, a sub-project of both SIG Cluster Lifecycle and Cluster API. Just reminding this meeting does adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so in general be excellent to one another, and also be aware that this call is being recorded and will be posted up on YouTube afterwards. If you have any topics that you would like to bring up, please go ahead and add them to the agenda doc, and I am linking that in the chat right now. And also, if you get a chance, please do add yourself to the attending list as well. To get started with, it looks like we have a PSA that version 0.4.7 was released. It adds support for reconciling the tags for the ELB. And as heads up, it does require new IAM permission. So anybody who is adopting it, make sure that you update the IAM permissions in addition to the images and binaries. All right, next up, we got our first demo here. So Andy, take it away with the tilt workflow.
Thanks, Jason. Hopefully this works. We'll see how it goes. So I have actually before I start with what I have, if you're not familiar with tilt, it is a way to do more rapid iterative development with Kubernetes-based applications. And so I have a couple of pull requests that I've created, one for Cluster API and a corresponding one for Kappa that try to make it easier to do rapid development. So the first thing I have is I've created a kind cluster on my laptop, and I have basically going to run tilt up at this point, and we'll hope that, oops, I apparently messed up a file. Hold on, I remember doing that. Give me just a second. This tilt settings, yep, fat fingered something. Alrighty, so now it's gonna go ahead and load my tilt file, which will attempt to pre-pull and pre-load into kind the cert manager images. This is an optimization so that if you are frequently deleting your kind cluster and recreating it, you don't have to rely on the kind cluster to pull the images over and over again. So this is just the first time that I'm loading them, so it takes a little bit longer. And then it puts in all of the cert manager YAML and waits to make sure that cert manager is up and running. And this doesn't take too long because I preloaded the images. So we'll wait for that. And I can walk through the tilt file and some of the stuff that is kind of nice and magic in here once we get this thing up and running. Okay, so there's cert manager is good. And now it's found that I want to have a CAPI controller manager, a Kappa controller manager. These are all the YAML pieces, and you'll see that nothing's happened with them yet. What it's actually doing right now is running a command on my laptop to do a build of the Cluster API core manager binary. And this takes a little under a minute on my laptop, and it'll be the same for the AWS or Kappa manager. And so the cool thing that I have here in the tilt file, and I got to give props to Chuck for pointing me at this in the first place, is that it supports live reloading of what's running in your Docker images. So rather than doing a full Docker build and an image replacement and a redeployment where it's destroying pods and recreating pods, what you can do is if you modify any of your Go source code or any of the inputs that matter, it can just do this go build command locally on your laptop, and then it'll copy the resulting binary into the running containers and issue a command to restart the main process that is running in each of the containers. And so it saves a lot of time because you don't have to rebuild and redeploy. It's really just The first time it will be doing a Docker build most likely because this is the first time I've pulled up the images. But what you can see here is it's doing what is essentially a minimal tilt only build. So I have basically a tilt helper target in my Docker file that pulls down the restart and the start scripts that come from the tilt folks. And then inside of a Debian Stretch Slim, which we can discuss what image we want to use if we want to go smaller with Alpine or BusyBox or something. It'll just take those two start and restart files as well as the manager that I built as part of either Core Manager or AWS Manager and only run these steps. So any of the things that are in the Docker file that we use to generate the normal images that we release, it's completely separate. This is just a tilt-only workflow. And you can see that basically everything's cached because I built this stuff on Friday. And then it loads the image over to my kind cluster, and then it will inject the images into the CAPI webhook service and the CAPI controller manager. And so this allows the tilt built image to be what's running in my cluster instead of pulling from the Kubernetes GCR bucket like it normally would. So it's all local. There's nothing that is coming from the internet or from the standard locations unless you want it to. And then you can see here, the container is up and running. This is the cluster API container. And eventually it'll get down here and we have the KubeADM control plane controller and so on and so forth. Kappa, very similar. It's the exact same Docker file, and it copies in the tilt built manager, and all of this stuff is up and running. So now we have this up and running. I could create a cluster if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. What I am going to show you is, let's say that I pull over my source code here, and we'll go into cluster API main.go. Actually, I'm going to go into the, because I've done this before, so I know it works. I'm going to go into the cluster controller, and I am going to just do, hold on. I am going to do r.log.info hello Kappa meeting, and I'm just going to save this and flip back over to my tilt output, and you'll see that it noticed that the cluster controller changed. And so it's rebuilding this core manager resource, and it's literally just doing go build to get the whole thing rebuilt. I don't know if there's any way to make this go any faster. I would hope that it wouldn't take 45 seconds to a minute to rebuild just the binary, but at least for right now, that's what it does on my laptop. But the nice thing is, once this finishes building, you'll see that it just does a copy and issues a restart. And the only thing that changes is that file gets put in place and the container stays up and running, and there's no, oh, I messed this up. Oh, I think yeah, sorry for the demo not working here. Yay, demo gods. I was reworking some stuff, but in general, this will not say that it's falling back into the next update method, and will do a live reload. I was changing some things late on Friday and must have missed something, but this will do a live reload once I fix the bug. And the nice thing about this, just to show you, yeah, I see your comment about -A. That's not actually what I want. And it is using cache builds. The nice thing about this is, actually, let me pull up the documentation. So if you go to the master set of documentation and, or sorry, this isn't in master yet. If you go to, do I have Netlify? Not yet. All right, let me show you the documentation that I have since it's not showing up. So if we go into docs book, source developer tilt, I have a whole document in here that will show you how to work with this. So once you have Docker, Kind, and Tilt installed and you clone Cluster API as well as any other providers that you want to use, you basically create a Tilt settings JSON file and stick it in your Cluster API checkout. And you need to fill in a few things here. You have to specify allowed contexts, and this is to tell Tilt which kubeconfig context is appropriate to work with so that you don't accidentally push it to a production cluster. And for Kind, if you're using at least 0.6, the default context is called kind. And then you specify a default registry, which is what you want your images to be tagged as if you don't want to stick with the default of whatever it is upstream. And then you tell it where to find any provider repositories. So we didn't want to put any hard coding into the tilt file in Cluster API to say, here's kappa, here's cap v, here's cap z, here's cap whatever. And so we took a federated approach where you essentially list out where on disk you have cloned the other providers that you want to work with. So for kappa, for example, it is a sibling on my checkout at least. I have one directory that's got all these different Cluster API repositories. And so I just say, go up a directory, and here's my Cluster API provider, AWS. And then I tell it which providers I'd like enabled. And so the Docker provider lives in the Cluster API repository. So this is always an option if you want to use it, and you can put this string in place. And then, if you've got other ones like Kappa, you would just give it the name of the provider as defined in the provider's tilt provider JSON file. And what you see here is this basically just says the name of my provider is AWS. Here is the image as it's known in the YAML files. You can ignore the ignore part because I'm going to take that out. And then what files should it be monitoring for live reloading? And so in this case, I've said main.go, the two Go module files, and then the main packages that we care about for building the image or building the manager binary. And so once you have all of this stuff in place, it will build and deploy when you do tilt up. And I have documentation around what the fields in tilt settings JSON mean, how to run tilt, what the available providers are out of the box, and what a tilt provider JSON might look like, and then what those config fields are for. And then if you are interested, you can additionally customize tilt inside of your Cluster API directory. You can create a tilt.d directory and put as many tilt files as you want in there, and it'll just load everything that's in there. So if you wanted to deploy something additionally with some extra customize or do some other tilt directives, you could put them in there. And then at the bottom, I just talk about what it's actually doing and how live updates work. I will, of course, fix the bug that I have that's broken live updating. Excuse me, that's what I have for a demo. Too bad that the live update didn't work, but these are pull requests right now. It's 1894 in CAPI, 1422 in Kappa. I need to fix a couple things before we can actually merge them. Like the Kappa PR breaks the quick start, for example, and I need to fix that. But I did want to just share this so you all could see this tilt flow, and hopefully once the stuff merges, you can take advantage of it so you don't have to worry about how to get Cluster API and the various providers deployed on your own. Anybody have any questions? All right.
I do really like rebuilding the binary locally and pushing it.
Yeah, so that was one thing that I struggled with because I was cheating off of what Chuck had pioneered, which was taking the builder image, which we have in our primary Docker files, and basically installing that in the Kind cluster, and that had the full Go toolchain, all the modules downloaded, and the ability to compile in the image. But the problem is that image is about 2 gigabytes. And so I don't know what the deal is on my 2017 MacBook Pro, but I mean, I could go make a cup of coffee while waiting for it just to load the Docker image into the Kind cluster. And then once it was loaded, the reloads, like rebuilding and reloading, went quickly. But this way, the Debian stretch image with the manager binary in there is about 100 megs. And I imagine we could go smaller if we went with another, like a smaller image, something smaller than the Debian Slim. But yeah, it's much nicer than trying to load a 2 gig image.
One of the things that I noticed at least a couple months ago with Tilt was one thing to watch out for is like rapidly saving a bunch of different files because because the build reload is like queued. So like sometimes you can get into a scenario where like you save main.go and then controller.go and then like a test file.go, and it will actually build 3 times sequentially. I don't know if they've fixed that, but that can slow down the build loop sometimes.
Yeah, so one thing that I've considered doing, and I didn't do it because I wanted to get this up and get it merged in, and then as people are playing with it, we can evaluate what we want to do. But you can tell it to manually trigger rebuilding. So the default is auto. And I imagine if you're rapidly making changes and it still queues up things, that's because of the auto trigger. And so we can make it so that the compilation of the manager binary is a manual trigger. And I'm just checking the docs here. You may be able to make the YAML be not auto done, although I'm not seeing that. I think the biggest set of changes that people would be making will be code changes in Go files. So if we switch the local resource for building the manager binaries to a manual trigger, or at least allow it to be customizable, then that would probably help out with that situation. The thing that I really, really want to do is make it so that as developers, we all have total flexibility of customizing things like that without having to make a change to a tilt file and then like decide, oh, I need to not include that in my Git commit because it's a local change and I don't want to share that with everybody. I want to make it as extensible as possible so that we can avoid having dirty trees in Git that's like, oh, don't commit that. So that was the reason for having the tilt.d directory so that you can go make changes. The only downside with the tilt.d inclusions is that they don't have access to any of the global variables that are defined in the tilt file, like the provider's map. So you basically can say deploy some extra stuff, but if you want to customize a setting in a global variable or a global map, you can't do that. But we certainly could add some fields that say, like for my provider, I want this to be a manual trigger instead of auto.
Could we move the provider map into like a config object that could be shared across those? Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be one way to approach that.
Well, so the individual provider, so there's the inline one, which is core and the Docker provider, and that's just in the tilt file right now. I could move it to a JSON file. Any other providers have to supply their own JSON files in their own repositories. And of course, the tilt.d stuff, you could, actually, no, you can't, because you can't get stuff into the global namespace. So yeah, I think, let me fix the bugs and let's get it merged after y'all review it. And then as new use cases come up and tweaks, like let's just keep working on it.
Sounds great. Thanks for putting that together, Andy.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Andy. Let me share my screen with the agenda. All right, so next up, we start the group topics. I did want to let everybody know that the KubeADM control plane create workflow has been merged. And I know some folks have expressed interest in helping out with the rest of the control plane implementation. So if you fall under that group, please go ahead and click on the tracking issue. We're going to use that to coordinate all further work, so it's all up to date. And we're going to start divvying out and self-assigning work off of that issue. For the most part, I can actually go click on that if GitHub will load for me. Oh, looks like I used the wrong link. All right. So this is the right link. So we have the types merged. We have the webhook merged and the base for the reconciler. All of the validations and defaultings we defined are in place. For the modifications, we have mostly documentation left, and we still have to implement the control plane initialized logic to only work if the control plane ref is not set, and that's mainly because the health check's not implemented yet. So we're not setting that through the KubeADM control plane right now. So we need to fall back to that for functionality. And right now we have the create workflow. We still need the delete workflow, scale up, scale down. The upgrade is likely to be one of the last things that we can work on because it's going to touch a little bit of everything. And the health check. There's some other documentation issues that we need to sort out. Nadir started on some of that with this issue 1727 and an associated PR there. So if you're interested in helping out, jump on this issue and let us know where you'd like to assist. Any questions there other than I need to update that link?
Is there a design or for the health check? Do we know what that might look like?
I know there were some basics that were put into the CAP, but Nadir can probably speak more to that.
Yeah, so there were some examples on it of types of checks around what etcd health and API server status. But it's a matter of finding out which ones give us the best signal in reality rather than just theoretically. So I'm making a start on that now, actually.
All right. Did that answer your question, Andrew?
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
All right, great. All right, in that case, the next item is yours with this full 1394.
Sure, yeah. I just was curious if someone could take a look at it just because it's been open for a while. I did the backport first. If that's a problem, I'd be happy to do the master one as well. But this is just getting a root volume created with the instance to have the same tags as the instance itself. Yep.
All right, sounds good. So if you can, please take a look at that PR and provide any feedback. Do we have any other group topics today? No. All right. In that case, it's over to you, Andy, for the new issue triage.
Okie doke. Give me a second. Hopefully that's the right share. Y'all can see the Kappa issues, right?
Sure can.
Okay. I'm going to start at the bottom. We have setting a NAT gateway ID on a subnet causes seg faults, and I think, actually no. I had thought this was one where it was maybe wasn't reproducible, but that must have been something else. So I I know Jason, you and Vince had commented on this. Is this something that I guess we probably just need to have somebody look into it, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
All right. Anybody want to sign up to see if they can reproduce the segfault here? If not, I'll just put help on this. Right. I'm going to put help. And from a milestone perspective, I'm just going to do next until we get somebody to look into it. Any objections? All right. Cluster AWS ADM, enable adding of additional policies to control plane and node roles. John, I see you are here and you have a PR for this.
Send the PR this morning. It passed the test. I think Aaron.
Awesome.
Okay to test it.
Cool. So given that we have some code, I think we can stick this in the milestone. Priority wise, we'll do our usual important soon. And we will get somebody to review this. I see Andrew and I are assigned, so I'll try and take a look at this once I fix my tilt stuff. Thank you, John. And Andrew, this is yours with the PR, right?
Yep.
Okay. Nadir, do you want to own reviewing this? Do you have time?
Yeah, it looked fine for me. It had your name on it for some reason, but yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm happy to review.
Okay. Oh, this was the one where you had the go path issues. Okay. Yeah, let me go ahead and put this in the milestone. Which one did you do this on? 04 first, Andrew?
Yeah, I did 04 first.
Okay. Let me, yeah, I mean, we can put this on 04 and then port it, but we'll definitely want it on master too.
Yeah, there were some questions about using a slightly different schema on master in a way that would break 0.4. It's Nadir's comment in this issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and it probably relates to. We'll come back to it. It's not one that needs triaging around customizing things like provision IOPS and things. It's kind of related.
And this it's not a breaking change, right? It's just adding a couple of fields. And
yeah, the 0.4 is not. It's just in the initial issue, there was some discussion around on master, might as well make it a bit more flexible and use a struct for the root device.
Okay. If assuming this merges for 0.4, we definitely need a corresponding PR in whatever shape for master to get in for alpha 3 before we cut it.
Yep, happy to do that.
Okay, so let's do this and get this in the right milestone. Okay. Clear this back. Ability to configure node disks. When creating nodes in a cluster, it would be useful to be able to request disk characteristics for performance, space, and cost. Yeah, we already can do the root disk size, but in terms of other things, disk type and IOPS, I guess this sort of dovetails with what we were just talking about for master, at least for expanding the configuration there. So I know I don't think Vince is here, but I know he had some concerns about continually expanding the scope of things, but I think, or at least in the middle of a release cycle, but I think given that we are talking about making some changes related to the issue we just talked about for master, that we might as well put this in the milestone as part of the work that you'd be forward porting, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. It just seems like additional fields to pass straight from the YAML into the create instance call, so it's pretty low lift, I think.
Okay. Can I assign this to you if you're going to be doing the forward port?
Yep, no problem.
Awesome. Thank you. Alrighty. Oh yeah, this one was mine. So I forget who reported this, but basically we have some code that checks to see if an error that comes back from described instances is a not found error, and it's not including invalid instance ID not found, which is what you get if it's truly not there, like post terminated, it's been cleared from the API. So we just need to make a change to the is invalid not found error minimally to include this code as well, and we should probably do it in both 0.4 and master. Looks like Vince was going to work on this one, but honestly, unless he picks it up, I do think this is a good first issue to work on. Alrighty. Oh, and get a priority in here. Okay, machine stuck in provisioned after NAT gateway reconciliation. Oh, this was one where they were deleting the NAT gateway and getting it reprovisioned, and the route tables weren't getting updated. And Vince has a PR, so double check which branch he's doing this against. Master. All right, so we will stick this in and give it input soon. And this is there. Okay. Route tables created for every subnet configured in cluster network spec. And I think we were waiting for some feedback on this one. Nadir or Andrew, did you all get a chance? Have you seen this comment?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so it's not recommended from a best practice point of view, but people might want to do it for cost.
So which is not recommended?
To not create a... Oh no, I see what they're doing. Yeah. It's a topology question, isn't it? Again.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there is a benefit. Not convinced there is. And people should be doing the Terraform if they've got very custom route table. I don't know. There might be some limits. That's an awaiting more evidence still for me.
Okay, so we'll just stick it in next.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't under the impression that route tables cost money. So I wonder if they're just hitting a limit, like you said.
Yeah, no, sorry. I thought this was the one where it's the NAT gateway, but no, route tables don't cost anything.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it in next for now. See if the reporter comes back. Elastic IP addresses already associated. Error during multi-AZ deployment. Tried to span multiple AZs, got an error. I'm guessing we need more detail on this. Or is this something that y'all think you could troubleshoot?
I think having more logs would probably help in this case. It's hard to tell from this whether it's more of a transient issue, or if something's failing reconciliation early and it's re-reconciling, or how we're getting into this state.
Yeah. Ashish, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so for things like this, can we, is it possible for us to use Tilt to let people capture their session so that we can get a view of the logs instead of the reporter having to repro the problem and give us information or logs?
There is a way to get Tilt to dump its engine status, which I believe when I was looking at it last week includes logs, but I think I'll have to go back and double check. It's pretty big. Like you would need to stick it in a gist or upload it to a file site or something. I think, I don't know that Tilt is necessarily the right thing. Like if we had a tool that could just easily go and grab YAML and the logs from the right controllers and redact any secrets that are in there, that might be nice to have. But I think in the short term, just asking for logs is probably what we're going to have to do.
Okay, because I think I saw Chuck doing that on one of his issues. So I thought, or at least I thought it was that, but yeah, that I just wanted to ask that. That's all.
Yeah, like I said, there's a way. I know you can dump the engine state for Tilt. Maybe there's a way to get the logs too. We can take a look.
Sorry, was this getting logs out of Tilt? Is that? Yeah, there's a snapshot feature that I think it's open now, and you can save a snapshot of your entire Tilt environment and then paste it into like GitHub, and people can see like the entire history of whatever your current Tilt environment was. It's pretty useful, assuming you're not logging anything sensitive.
Yeah, I'm just looking real quick. I have Tilt. I don't see a snapshot in my version unless it's like a feature you have to enable. I do see, like they have.
Yeah, it might be dev. I'm not entirely sure, but let me paste the link in chat.
Andy, I think you'd had create a snapshot on the top right corner of the when you had the Tilt UI up.
Oh yeah, I do see the create a snapshot button there or link there. Yeah, we can look into that.
Cool.
All right, so I opened up an issue. This relates to the cluster API issue that I had created last week or so about trying to add a project roadmap document. And so I created a rough draft with some seed ideas. Nothing is set in stone here. And I think Nadir, when we were talking about this the other day, there was something about CloudWatch in here maybe, but I don't remember the details. So if you all have ideas for what we can do in the upcoming versions and any sort of backlog features, I would definitely recommend trying to put stuff in here, add comments and questions if you have them. And once things kind of settle a little bit, I'd like to turn this into a markdown document that we store in the repository and keep up to date. There also is a corresponding cluster API draft roadmap. Let me grab it real quick just to show you all. It is, I can probably just stick a link in here. So draft cluster API roadmap. So this one is a bit bigger because it's more around cluster API and not Kappa specifically, but I would encourage you all to look at this one too. And if you have questions, comments, ideas, please take a look. And I did also post to the SIG Cluster Lifecycle Google group and the Discuss forum for the cluster API one, this one. I did not post for the Kappa one because I wanted to have the talk here first before figuring out where the best places were to post. But if y'all are in agreement, I would like to try to get these or to get a roadmap document. Again, rough draft will be updated, or I should say living document, and get a markdown file in the repository as part of this release cycle. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the milestone. And I don't have any idea for timing. So if y'all have thoughts, it's probably going to be just as we edit, and if it looks like we have a decent draft to put in, I'll go ahead and open up the pull request. Oops, not that one. Come back. Hold on. Gotta go get my window that I just closed. So bear with me for just a second. And we don't have much left. This last one about events not being generated in a certain case. I looked at this morning, and I'll be honest, the code seems to be in place where it should be generating events. So I think somebody's going to have to go and try to reproduce, basically. So unless anybody's willing.
So I know in the past we had issues with throttling of events, and I know we made some changes to our configuration to do that. But I wonder if we might be hitting that again.
Okay, yeah, I think that is definitely a good suggestion to look at, and I think somebody's going to have to go and try and reproduce and get the logs. And that's it. I am going to put this in next for right now. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you, Jason.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns, or other topics they want to bring up before we adjourn for the day? No? If not, thank you all, and we will see you next time.